Hi, I'm Steve Blears, this time on the Media Training Podcast. Hi, good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. No. At school, I bet a teacher told you, it's only your own time you're wasting. That's true for media appearances. Cut the waffle, play the conversation game. We're discussing the unwritten rules of appearing in the media, specifically TV and radio news. But a lot of this advice also extends to other media, print, online, podcasts, that sort of thing. Right, let's get into it. Unwritten rule of appearing in the media, number 1. You won't get the questions in advance. What? That doesn't seem fair, does it? Why does this happen? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Journalists prefer not to share interview questions beforehand because it's 100% likely that you'll over-rehearse your answers, possibly even script them in advance, and that will look and sound terrible on air. Journalists want to encourage spontaneous, authentic responses rather than over-rehearsed answers. You'll sound better speaking naturally, and you'll sound off the cuff. Now, I can hear you thinking, off the cuff, that sounds like a nightmare. Don't worry, I've got some tips coming up. The other reason why they don't give you the questions in advance is because those questions are very likely to change. This is about the production process. There'll be a whole production team working on, say, a drive time news show. Reporters and producers will be tasked with setting up guests, writing the scripts and questions, which are then passed on to the presenter. Now, quite often the presenter will want to ask a question that they've come up on their own rather than, say, read from a script. If you're anticipating a question that doesn't turn up, that's going to throw you, yeah? So, how do you get a gist of what you'll be asked? Well, when a journalist calls you to discuss a story, what they're basically doing is sounding you out. On that initial call, they'll ask you all sorts of questions. Make a note of them because those are the topics and themes which are most likely to appear when you're on air. Take those questions, don't script the answers, draw a mind map, write a few bullet points, jot down a couple of notes, key ideas, opinions, anecdotes that you'd like to share. The act of doing this will bring basically what you already know front of mind. Practicing these answers out loud with a friend or colleague will help you sound fluent, and you'll be good to go. The next unwritten rule of broadcast interviews, number 2, they are pretend conversations. What do I mean interviews are pretend conversations? Well, think about how absurd a live media interview is. There you both are, having a chat with potentially tens of thousands, possibly millions of people watching or listening. Media interviews operate under the sort of guise of a casual conversation, but a conversation that's going really well on both sides, and everyone needs to look really interested while you ignore cameras and crew and studio managers and all those sorts of things. So how do you do these pretend conversations? Well, firstly, you must take turns. If you're being interviewed, after the first question, don't ramble on for 5 minutes without taking a breath. Similarly, don't be monosyllabic with yes, no answers. Play the conversation game. Share your opinions, experience and know-how, and crucially, show that you're a pro by using your tone of voice to make it clear that you've finished your point. Maybe not that cheesy, but you get the idea. That way, you're signposting to the presenter it's their turn to talk, and you'll be playing the conversation game, and they'll love you for it. Don't just tail off, kind of mumble your way through. You've made your point and you're kind of rambling on a bit, and you're waiting for them to jump in any minute, but you feel like you really shouldn't stop talking. Don't do that. Finish your point. Let them ask another question, which leads us to unwritten rule of media interviews, number 3. Time is limited. Don't waste it. So, as a guest, it's not your job to fill airtime. You aren't the co-presenter here. Use your time efficiently and get to your point. At school, I bet a teacher told you, it's only your own time you're wasting. That's true for media appearances. Here's an example. Joining us now is Steve. Steve, tell us about your long career in TV and radio. Hi, good morning. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. No, cut the waffle, get to your point. You may have only a minute or two. Say your best stuff first and avoid generic fillers like, thanks for having me. Thanks, that's a great question. First of all, I'd like to thank, or I appreciate the chance to address this issue, or that's a very insightful question. Don't do it. Cut out the flannel. Okay, this next unwritten rule is brilliant and is TV specific. Unwritten rules of appearing on the media number 4, you may be on screen, but you may not be able to see the person interviewing you. What? Now, you'll have seen this on the news. The anchor is in the studio. You pop up on a big screen because you're in a different location. The presenter is looking and talking straight at you on the screen. But what they don't tell you is you won't see them. This is another TV fallacy. You may be in a remote studio the size of a broom cupboard with a TV camera at a remote location, or more likely these days in front of your PC at home on Zoom. So, in this situation, how do you play along? How do you make it look natural? How do you look like you can magically see each other? Well, simply look at the camera lens or the lens on your PC webcam. Why do we do this? Because it creates the illusion that you're giving the presenter and the audience eye contact. Also, if you're doing a remote interview, and this is crucially important, assume that you're in vision from the moment you get in front of the camera. Just because they're not speaking to you doesn't mean you're not in vision. So you don't want to appear on TV picking your nose, eating something, or with resting git face. Look at the lens. So look at the lens when a presenter or reporter isn't present, but if you are in person with the interviewer, they're next to you, in that scenario, you look at them, not the lens. Unwritten rule number 5, understand why you've been invited on air. Now, this might seem obvious, but you need to have a clear idea why you've been invited on TV or radio. This will help you prepare and in some respects understand how relaxed or on point you should be. So how do you figure out your role? Firstly, are you or the organisation you represent directly part of the story? Put another way, is your contribution central to that story? So for example, your business goes bankrupt, you're the leader in that business, the story's plainly about you, yeah? Alternatively, have you been invited on as an expert? In this case, you're not part of the story, but you'll be expected to share your insight, opinions, and expertise. For example, you're an insolvency specialist. Slightly dull example, sorry. So you're not associated with the bankrupt business, but you understand why lots of businesses fail. You're an expert, and you're on air to talk about it. And incidentally, this is a real sweet spot that we encourage our clients to occupy. And the third role is you're a bystander. You live near the business that's gone bankrupt. Sometimes you shop there and you're sorry it's closing. The term for these types of interviews is vox pops, questions to the man or woman in the street. In this role, expect to be asked anything from your views on politics to the price of fish. Journalists doing vox pops are like charity muggers. This happens in the street. So those are just 5 of the many unwritten rules of media appearances. 1, you don't get the interviews in advance. 2, play the conversation game in interviews. 3, time is limited, don't waste it. 4, you may be in vision, but unable to see who's interviewing you. And 5, as we've just discussed, understand your role. So at Marvelous Media Training, we help leaders become confident on-air communicators so you can share your expertise and the great work you do. Drop me a line, hello@bitfamous.co.uk. Thanks for listening.